Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October session of the Interventions in Disability Politics seminar series, hosted by the Centre for Applied Philosophy, Politics and Ethics at the University of Brighton. We are delighted this evening to be joined by another Brighton scholar, Chantal Spencer. Chantal is working currently in the Department of Design and Architecture, and she is, I believe, the chair, Chantal,
Yeah.
of the Disability and Culture Research Group, which is one of our sister organisations at Brighton, pushing forward research into disability equality and the struggle for liberation. Chantal is in the second year, I believe, of her PhD, working very closely on co-production, forms of exploitation which may be encountered there, and how disabled people can exact real influence over the design of public space, processes, and the world in which we find ourselves. Chantal's talk tonight will be called The Labour of Participation, Lived Realities of Disabled People, Defining and Operationalizing the concept of labour in participatory research design methodologies. Easy for you to say, Chantal. With no with no further ado, I will shut up and I will hand over to our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Luke. Yeah, I know. I sorely regret the whole participatory practice title or ever having involved myself in it. The amount I have to say it is very difficult. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this talk today. And yeah, so today will be a kind of mixture, a journey of talking through my PhD so far. I'm right at the beginning, although I'm in my second year, I'm still part-time, so I'm still very much in the kind of sort of discovery magpie phase. But I'm already encountering some really interesting research, and I'm looking forward to hearing this, feedback from this group. I've been to quite a few of these, and I think that the people that attend tend to have a really important perspective on these things. And sadly, at Brighton Uni, that there is a quite a significant lacking in these kind of spaces. So it's really, really lovely to be here and to talk about my work. So today I'm going to take you through what basically is a kind of ontological journey. This will be around a paper that I wrote and had published last year. And that paper is all about kind of hidden labours and how they are hardwired into systemic oppression, and based on the principles of participation in change making and how it's often associated with, grand ambition and protest and political reform. However, for marginalised people, and in particular disabled people, it's a constant process of self-advocacy and retrofitting their surroundings and their relationships and even ourselves simply to sustain our existence in a world designed for other people's comfort. So I'll introduce myself and my PhD. I'll talk through the burden of change testimonials, which is a paper that is available to read on my ResearchGate. It's and I can put a link to that in the chat at the end. And then I'm going to talk about a roundtable research event that that took place last year as part of my PhD research. I'm still working through that, so I'd be really interested to hear people's feedback about the things that I've discovered from that roundtable, and then I will talk about my hopes, aims, and mystical predictions of the future of my PhD. So just to introduce my work, I'll try and be as brief as possible, but I think it's really necessary to understand the rest. So the name of my PhD, the title, is Moving Beyond Participatory Practice Towards Methodologies of Radical Equity. So my PhD research really explores the legacies of oppression that exist within traditional participatory design and research methodologies. So my work aims to move beyond prevailing ideologies of inclusivity, particularly those formulated by individuals in positions of power. And instead, I argue that a radical philosophical shifts in thinking are needed, where those who are conventionally designated as recipients of inclusivity lead the discourse. So design justice and disability justice principles acknowledge that any given design advantages some people and disadvantages others, according to intersecting social structures such as race, disability, and gender. And my argument is that obviously participatory design models and research practices and methodologies are themselves designed structures and systems, so they fall prey to the same biases and issues as any other designed object or system. So my work is really about uncovering who and what, where those are. And historically speaking, much of participatory practice and participatory research was designed by those that we call in mobility justice terms the kinetically elite, with the final kind of destination to be profit for large organizations. Of course, there have been lots of grassroots interpretations of that, and those are the ones that I look at as inspiration. But my work at the moment is really kind of focusing on critiquing those kind of versions of inclusivity that have been hardwired into large organizations. So one of the principles that I speak about a lot in my work is participation and the matrix of domination. So Patricia Hill Collins, a Black feminist academic, talks about the matrix of domination in terms of a matrix where people are controlled. Sorry, I've actually lost all of my notes. I'm just trying to do the slide without my notes. And what my argument is that participation, although it exists and it acts as an inclusive practice, what happens is that actually it's acting and working within this matrix of domination. And for us to really achieve equity in future practices, what we need to do is start eroding at that matrix of domination and to start thinking outside of the box, or to start rubbing up against the box and to erode those away and create methodologies that actively center equity rather than equity and mobilities rather than inclusion and participation. Because just having inclusion and just having participation does not guarantee us equity. So I'm a disabled feminist academic, and I center my work on the complex uncertainties of uncertain realities of disabled people in their lives. I love this quote from Bell Hooks, where she says, "Let me begin by saying that I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend and to grasp what was happening around me and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away, and I saw theory in that location for healing." So I really resonate with this, although I haven't managed to make the pain go away, but I think I understand it better, and it feels like a place where I belong and where I fit. So, you know, like Bell Hooks, I came to this in order to be a part of it. And so I appear a lot in my work. I'm very visible in my work. A lot of my work is autoethnographic, and there will be some research at a later point in my PhD where that will be a collaborative autoethnography, but that I appear a lot in my work. And as my standpoint as a disabled woman, so that I bring my standpoint into my work as well. So one of the other parts of the work that I do is, although my PhD is a design PhD, it's sustainable design. So in fact, what happens is that there is often an overspill in lots of different areas, disability studies, of course, but also in the sociological concept of immobilities. So Leslie Murray describes it as not just about movement or stopping all movement, but about the restrictions of movement or forced movement, whether that is felt or experienced. So mobility justice principles assert that while freedom of movement is often perceived as a fundamental human right, it is in fact dictated by intersecting axes, again, of oppression or privilege that shape a person's physical, emotional, and social and cultural political immobilities. So for me, immobilities is a space where we can witness the oppression, where we can see a tangible evidence of what happens when we are too exhausted to do any more work, when we have been, taken, all of our energy's been taken and we can't do the things that we need to do. So what this means to me is, in essence, is what we're looking at is the labor of participation within CRIP temporalities. So CRIP temporalities are the ways in which bodily and mental disabilities shape the experience of time. These include needing to use time-consuming adaptive technologies like screen readers, working slowly during a pain flare-up, or only being able to look at a screen for short periods of time. So for me, I think that this moves further on from just that. My interpretation of CRIP temporalities is that we also have all the time before an activity where we're preparing, all the time after an activity that we're preparing for and that we've done. And what that feels like is something that is often not calibrated and not counted when people are, thinking about participatory practice and what we're asking of people to give. I think that it's often misjudged, the amount of energy that it can take, either emotionally, socially, physically, and what we're actually asking of people to attend. Yeah, so this is a map that I created for the Accessible City strategy. And this was designed to talk about my mobilities in my city and how I experience these in day-to-day life. And you can see on the map that it might be difficult to see because it's quite small, but some of them are very physical places and some of them are not physical places. So it's me on my mobility scooter. Yeah, so that's just what I mean by mobilities, is that they can be it can be physical spaces and it can be non-physical spaces. So Luke, I'm really sorry, but these are the wrong slides. I don't know what's happened, but I've actually brought up the wrong slides.
Don't worry, these things happen. Do you want me to quickly drop you a message with the slides that you sent me earlier, in case they're the right ones? Would that be easiest for you?
It's like it saved them before I edited them, which is a bit of a problem because loads of them have got my notes on them. If we can just give me a minute to try and sort this out.
Of course.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to stop sharing.
I'll just pause the recording as well.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you. This is the sort of ontological journey that I was talking about earlier. And this is some of the examples from a paper that I wrote and I published last year at the Systemic Design Conference. And it's on my ResearchGate. It's called Pressure Points in the System. So this is all about the kind of realities of the lived experience of disabled people and what we go through in day-to-day life. And it's a sort of kind of baseline evidence of baseline. So in a term coined by the Latina feministas, they call testimonios. So testimonios are stories that the Latina feminista tell in academic spaces as a way to mark them in the annals of history so they can't be forgotten. So most of these are not academic examples. These are examples of artworks, stories and things like that. but I believe that they express a really important part of the journey. So that was why I kind of wrote the paper. So this the first element of the paper is really talking about the unerasable nature of burden. So I talk about the fact that burden exists, and that when we streamline systems, what happens is that those systems tend to just shift the burden down the line. So Bailey wrote, the academy was built on the labor and women and other marginalized people who did the work of life, so that these philosophers could enjoy the life of mind. And I argue that that still happens now, you know. So it's a really interesting one. And this artwork is by an artist called Maravilla, and it is an artwork that talks about a 7 ancestral stomach. So Maravilla talks about his history of being Ecuadorian, and how the centuries of oppression have impacted him in his 7 generations, which is an indigenous kind of perspective on sustainability. And I think it's a really interesting way of understanding this, how these things impact. And this is really a story about his journey with bowel cancer, and his family have all had bowel issues. And he talks about how he relates that to the oppressions that his ancestors had. And I think it's a really interesting way of framing that example in a kind of non-Eurocentric way. So the next one here, this is the lovely Beth here, and it's a book written by her mother called Hole in the Heart. So I kind of decided to begin the journey here at the most sort of primal point of all of our realities. You know, the one thing that we should all definitely have from birth is the love of a mother, right? And how kind of, you know, this quote here that Henny Beaumont wrote about her beautiful daughter: I found it almost impossible to love her because of her disability. So I didn't want to bring this into the equation as a way of kind of judging her or making any kind of judgment about the statement, but I think it's a really poignant one to remember. And I think that one of the biggest one of also a very, very common thing that happens within kind of disabled people and disabled communities is that we have a narrative of being difficult to love or feeling difficult to love. So that is a really strong one. It's also an example of how we look at the burden of change, and how so often it falls on the shoulders of the oppressed and the people that are maybe the least able or responsible for the issues. And here Henny Beaumont's daughter Beth, this tiny little baby, is now given the burden of fighting against these massive concepts of sexism, of the body perfect, of, you know, fascist, you know, ideals of who should be alive and who shouldn't be alive. And although all of this burden is now on this tiny little child, and what she's got to do is she's got to fight hard, and she's got to fight to gain the love of her own actual mother. And we know that she does in the end. So that shows what a wonderful, amazing human being she is, but she shouldn't have had to. So I think that for me, this is a really important part. And going through life feeling difficult to love is also something that resonates with me in my life too, and I see it as a labor. This next one I wanted to talk about was the disability justice creating collective access in Detroit. So Mia Mingus and Leah Lakshmi Piepsnasina, they were going to a conference, social justice conference in 2009, I think it was. And although it was a social justice conference, there was very little accommodation other than this sort of general wheelchair accessible venue. So what happened is that these 3 Crip Femmes, as they called themselves, went and decided to create a collective called Creating Collective Access in Detroit. And this meant that they took on the responsibility of bringing together bringing together lots of disabled people and working out ways in which they could support each other, sort of mini care webs. And they took on this whole big responsibility of making sure that the space is accessible, because for the first time there was a disability stream for them to attend, and they wanted people to attend. So they take on this huge responsibility. And one of the quotes they say is that, knowing we had to do it for ourselves because it is so rare for movement spaces to consider accessibility beyond logistics. And my question here is that this is actually very run of the mill. This happens all the time, where we take on additional responsibilities for organizations and conferences and places where we are participating, where we need to attend. And even if we're just doing it for ourselves, we're constantly trying to fit it around our needs so that we can attend without too much damage. What was interesting is that in this blog post where they detail all of this work, there wasn't any mention of how exhausted they were at the end of it. And I'm really interested. I would one day would love to find them and ask them this question. Like, why didn't they mention about how much effort it was afterwards? Did they feel that they had to be really positive about it? And two, how much effort. I mean, having just been to a conference myself, I know how much that took from me, and I was only managing my own needs. So yeah, really interesting part. So the next artwork that I'm really wanted to show you was this sculpture from Emily Barker, where she shows these concrete slabs inside of folders. And these are kind of representing the never-ending invisible workload of managing the paperwork of chronic illness. She refers to the violence of administration language, and then it degrades and dehumanizes her. Again, something that is in, almost all disabled people's lives. This is a constant worry and a difficulty that weighs us down and takes our energy. And while we're doing this, we're not able to do something else. I can't tell you how many times I've had to cancel entire days because I've had to stay in for phone calls from a GP or sitting on the phone for an hour waiting for them to answer. So Henny Beaumont who wrote the book before, she did a series of illustrations which are interesting too. And this one talks about kind of society and how society and existing in society is like a series of wounds, and then it experiences it as a threat to the life or mind, and it goes through you. And I feel that that's really interesting, especially as an autistic person myself. I can really relate to this image, and how these are the realities of everyday people. Another one, we're looking at an image around inclusion. This one is really about prioritizing the needs of the larger group of children, and by doing so, you're deprioritizing the needs of the individual's physical and emotional safety. And still now, in 2024, we're still doing that. We are always prioritizing, so often that we're prioritizing the needs of the many, and it's and this is not just in playgrounds. So maybe the child would have been included if the child had been given more time to adapt to the space, or a little bit more encouragement, or maybe a visit beforehand. So yeah, an interesting one. So the last one in this series was particularly interesting to me in that it opened up my eyes. I didn't realize that as studies show that 70% of males in the UK prison population have speech and language issues. So it really interesting to see that if you think, when, change making might be something that you want a bit more money or a better car or something like that. And if you haven't been supported through time to be able to achieve those things, then change making becomes, can become an illegal act. And to know that there's so many people in prisons with speech and language issues in UK prisons is a real testament to how we are failing our people with disabilities, people with communication issues. And yeah, and I think that when we understand that communication can be such a prevalent barrier and such a huge issue, I think that's another really important part of the labor of the burden of change, you know, when you are unable to say what you need to say or express yourself. So that's the paper that I wrote. That's the kind of summary of that paper. And yeah, so I'll quickly move on to this roundtable research event that I did recently, and that just kind of working through. So the roundtable was a group of participatory, here we go, this is going to be difficult to say, a group of participatory practitioners with lived experience of disability. So the idea was that we would have a conversation, a discussion with loads of practitioners talking about participatory practice from their perspective, what it means to them in terms of what, what are their experiences of participatory practice, why choose participatory practice, and does lived experience of disability make you more or less likely to choose that method. I also asked them what costs, emotional, mental, cultural, social, and physical, does this work have on the workforce, and how do you mitigate the negative impacts? So another question was, so why is it that with all these costs previously mentioned, that you go back to PD as a way of working? So some of the key themes that came from this were connection, giving so much to the work, removing your voice and masking, personal growth, and the labor of positive narrative of disability. So when we were talking about connections, one of the things that came up were alienation, allyship in the terms of that being a labor, and allyship in terms of that being positive. So when one of the really interesting things that came out of this is the most key for me for some reason, is that one of the participants said, the minute I started working for that organization, to lots of the community groups, I became the man, and that's really an uncomfortable space. So now I represent the authorities, even though my role is to work within the authority, advocating for inclusion. So I thought that was really interesting, and I've since found that from discussions that this is a really common occurrence for a lot of people, and a lot of people in a lot of different settings like this. So another one, allyship of labour. So someone was saying, I felt a lot of pressure. I was working with them on something else at the time, and they would blow off on me because I was like the only one that was a safe person that they could do that with. So having another person there and having to be their rock through this whole process. And the next one is the allyship positive. So they were like, I'm so grateful when a non-disabled allies will step into the space and say, hang on, we shouldn't be going for an hour without a break. Do we need to get people a chance to move their bodies a bit? And so that's the kind of allyship of, non-disabled people with disabled people. And the allyship labor was actually disabled people with disabled people. So I thought that was those are really interesting themes for that. So the next one I think is was probably quite an obvious one to come out, but I'm glad that the things were said that I imagined we're going to say as well, alongside of new things. So one of them, some of the key themes here were the giving so much to the work, and the sub themes for that were empathy, burnout, and authenticity. So in terms of empathy, it was interesting because everybody talked about empathy in different ways. But one of the ones that stood out is someone saying, I disregard my own boundaries within that because I'm trying to make sure everyone else has a say and has that space. And I think that that's really telling in terms of that. And I can't think of many jobs in which you would be expected to do that. And I wonder, what kind of boundaries those were. The next one is burnout. So when I set up the support group, it was valuable to other participants and to myself. But after 5 years, I realized that actually I was burning out through it. So that's interesting as well, because it connects to alienation too, right? If you're burnt out, then you can't participate in the community groups because you're the practitioner. And the next one was authenticity. Again, lots of people talking about authenticity. So I think a massive part of living the lived experience of running things like roundtables is that people feel more comfortable to be open about their experiences. I think it builds rapport. So authenticity was interesting in that everybody was talking about it. And then later on, we'll see that it's connected to a completely opposite theme, and that's why I've kind of kept it in there. Another one was removing your voice as a labor, like it's a labor for some. So one of those was masking. And when I mean masking, I'm talking about neurodivergent masking or other types of masking, I suppose, where we have to put on a facade to be kind of accepted in the world. It's very damaging, it's very difficult, and it takes a lot of our capacities to do that. So when I asked the speaker, I said, do you feel that when you are in these work situations that you have to mask your neurodivergence in order to not influence other neurodiverse people around you? This is in response to her saying a large piece of text. So this is a quicker way for me to sort of bring it in, but it was me responding to what she said. I was trying to get her to kind of summarize what she was saying. And she said, yes, definitely. And then she goes on to explain that disability justice is one of her special interests. So if you know about what special interests are for neurodivergent people, is that they are great passions. It's extremely difficult for us to not talk about our special interests. It's extremely upsetting to have to always keep them at bay. It's very much a labor to have to do that. So the other one is removing your voice. You have to sometimes swallow that pride or thing you feel passionate about so that you can allow people to speak their truth. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, that that's what people have to do. And I'm not sure that has been talked about. It's there's not a lot of research that I've been able to find, and if anybody has any, please throw it my way, because I'm plowing through the darkness at the moment, where people are actually talking about participatory practitioners who have lived experience of disability. It seems like the only papers that are being written about that I could find are about participants with disabilities. Yeah. So personal growth was another one. People found that they were better at their job. They found that they understood more. And so in practice, this person is a wheelchair user. And at first they were really fixated on physical disabilities. But then in the end, their journey became a bit more, they understood that there's a whole realm of other things to do with that. Another really interesting one is that that people felt that they could identify more strongly with being disabled, and that they felt a more strong sense of their own identity, which was a really great offshoot from that. And the last one, and I'm realizing we're running out of time a bit, so I am going to rush a bit, Luke. So the last one was really about talking about disability. This is a difficult one for me to pin down. It might turn into two themes, I don't know, but kind of being the bridge. So they talk about knowing everyone in the room are kind of like CEOs, and the majority of them are going to be non-disabled, and a lot of them are going to be white men in privileged positions. And then I got to come and justify why they should care about disability inclusion, and it does take its toll more than it did. The next one is this disingenuous ethical conflict. So as we remember earlier, everybody was really proud about their authenticity, which of course they should be, and it's awesome. But this person who works for an agency who promotes disabled media workers was talking about, but everything I kind of do, because it's almost selling disability, is framed very differently. And I find that hard, because I don't want to feed into the tick box corporation being like that. And I find the balance really hard to manage with my own ethics. And again, some ableism down at the bottom there, where people are not believing someone and wanting to know credentials and things about their disabilities and all sorts of horrible stuff. So yeah. So the last part of this, and then I will skip quite a few slides, is looking at the agreements and disagreements. So on the whole, everybody kind of agreed on most things. So I don't know if people were being silent about things they didn't agree on. It was quite a jovial, kind of nice environment. So maybe they didn't want to ruin the vibe. But from what they said, that's what we got. But what we did see is a contrast in how people were managed in their in their workplaces themselves. So people that were working for non-disabled led organizations often relied on intervention and based support, which had to be specifically requested rather than being integrated into the systems. And in contrast, the participants who employed by disabled led organizations described a different experience where their support was embedded into the organization's daily practices. So research has shown that disabled led environments tend to adopt a more inclusive approach, and this small group of people very much confirmed that reality. So I'm just going to skip these because we haven't got time, and kind of go to the next. So yeah. So
sorry, Chantal, just to let you know, because we had a bit of a break in the middle, I don't mind overrunning by a few minutes, so don't feel rushed in the final part.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. All right. I'll go back to this then. I'll go back to this one. So one of the things, so this is a screenshot of a Google search for the word "nothing about us without us." And during the roundtable, people mentioned "nothing about us without us" as a reason for doing participatory practice, right? And I thought this kind of screenshot of the Google, Google search was really interesting because there's so much life in it, right? There's so much life. There's so much like anger and fighting, and we're just there, and but also unity, and everything's a bit scrubby and kind of handmade and not corporate and just there, and people standing up for things that they believe in, and it's beautiful and it's full of life, you know. But the way I see a lot of participatory practice is, or certainly the argument for participatory practice in many organizations, including academia, for the large part, and how things are expected to be funded and things like that. I see it like this, you know, we've commodified our "nothing about us without us." We've made them into things that work again within the matrix of domination. We've made "nothing about us" into something that capitalism can dig its vampire teeth into and bleed dry and get working, you know. So I feel what we really need is to bring it back to this, and that's what I'm hoping to do with the work that I'm doing. So yeah, my hopes, aims, and mystical predictions is to really just kind of create a new way of thinking about a new methodology. I'm aware that it's going to be a big struggle, and that but I'm up for the struggle, and it may just be that I think maybe my PhD might be more about arguing why we need the change in thinking than actually being able to come up with something and that actually it'll be my life's work, which I'm happy with that. The next stage in my research is a sort of triangulation of getting opinions and perspectives on these is a collaborative autoethnography project where I will be working with other people, and we will be doing collaborative autoethnography and looking at the labor of participation in terms of how, and yeah, so that they will be participating in something in their lives and recording it, and we will come together and do some collaborative autoethnography together, and in that way that will be how I get the next piece of the puzzle in terms of my research that should happen kind of around next year. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry about the technical issues, and I had no notes, so I might have blitzed past a few things, but I'd like to leave you with this slide because it means a lot to me. that bottom-up designing just leaves us at the bottom. We need to think about moving ourselves off of the bottom through the designs that we do. And thank you very much.
And thank you, Chantal, for a really excellent presentation.